Hey, Jordan Belfort here, the Wolf of Wall Street. Welcome to the first episode of 2022 in the Wolf's Den. And I have a guest on today, someone I have such massive respect for, who I've wanted to come on the podcast for so long. The stars finally aligned. He's a literally world-class author. He's written 20 books, many of them made into world-class movies. So in that regard, we have a lot in common, and we also kind of launched our careers at the same time. I'm talking about Mr. Ben Mezrich. Ben, how are you?
I'm great. This is awesome to do, so thanks so much.
You are truly a great writer. You really are. Far better than me. I mean, I write because I had to write this book because it was like sort of this moment in my life where I was like sort of hit bottom. It was a way for me just to like sort of make sense of my life. Amazingly, it ended up becoming a really popular book, but you really are a writer. And I want to ask you one important question. Of all the books that you've written, what's there's a lot of them are financially related. What have you learned? What's the one thing that you've learned from all of these books? As you interview all of these famous people, you've been around, you've written books about the kids from MIT that cracked the code for card counting, that became the movie 21. You wrote, I think it was The Accidental Billionaires became Social Network, right?
Right.
Then you've recently written Bitcoin Billionaires about the Winklevosses. Is it Winklevi? How does that go?
I think it's accepted Winklevi now. It's part of the
Winklevi, okay, like octopi, Winklevi, okay. And I love the way, it's interesting, the movies have been great from the books that you've written, which is a testament to the books themselves. But what have you, is it just like, when you're writing these books and doing all the research, is it just more like, you're just writing as from an author, or are you learning things from it yourself that you could take away into your own life?
I mean, I'm definitely learning things, but let me just start by saying one question I get asked in almost every interview is, what's the story that you wished you had been able to write? And every time I answer, your story. I always say Jordan Wolf of Wall Street was the one story that I can think of that is such a phenomenal story. And your book was wonderful, by the way. I loved it. I've read it more than once. The movie is phenomenal. And so I'm a big fan of yours. And it's truly one of those epic American stories that I think, will stay with us for a very long time. Yeah. But I learn a lot. I'm a layman in almost everything. I don't know a lot going into these stories. I'm not, I wasn't on Wall Street. I don't have a real financial background. I don't have a math background. I don't know a lot about building websites. And so when I dive into a story like about the building of Facebook, or about, Bitcoin, or I wrote one just recently about GameStop, I'm going in as someone who doesn't know anything. And then I follow my characters around for 6 months, learn everything that they have to tell me, and then try and distill it in a way that someone who knows nothing about it could understand. So I come in it pretty blind each time. And I've written about biotechnology. I wrote a story about George Church in Boston, who's making a woolly mammoth. It's called Woolly. I knew nothing about CRISPR technology and that. So I just dive in and ask a lot of dumb questions and follow the characters around and learn from them. So I start with nothing each time.
It's interesting. You don't really write like takedown pieces, in the sense that it's not like you don't like what you wouldn't write like about an Elizabeth Holmes or something like that. You more write about the better, really interesting stuff, right? It's not like expose stuff.
No, I'm not trying to burn anybody or take anybody down. I want to make all my characters into heroes, even the characters that did things that may not be heroic. I'm following it from their point of view. So most of the time, I'm not going in, and I don't really write true crime. I really write stories about people who figure out a way to beat the system. They come up with some idea, they use their brains. Often they get caught and they get in trouble, but what they're doing is trying to beat the system that's set up against them. So every story is that route.
Head to netsuite.com/wolf for this special one-of-a-kind financing offer on the #1 financial system for growing businesses. netsuite.com/wolf. When you look back at social, like for Accidental Billionaires, which became Social Network, right? What would you say? What was it that Zuckerberg was the movie accurate? Was he trying to accomplish? Was it a lonely guy that wanted to have more friends and be socially relevant, or was there actually something deeper? He wanted to get rich. Was it recognition really that drove him?
It wasn't money. It definitely wasn't money. I mean, I think we told a very accurate portrayal of what happened that first year. Zuckerberg might disagree, but Eduardo, Sean Parker, the Winklevoss, I had a lot of great sources who basically opened up to me. And, these were geeky, nerdy kids. A guy like Mark was not socially cool, and he was very, good at computers, and he attempted to create a world in which a guy like him could be king. And he faced off against the Winklevi, who were the giant jocks from every '80s movie. And to him, it's a little bit of megalomaniacalism. I mean, he wants to rule the world. It's not about getting rich. It never was about getting rich. It was really about changing the face of the world so that people like him could be social, dominate, and sort of live these virtual lives. So I think in some respects he's achieved his vision because he's transformed the entire world into a world where a guy like Zuckerberg can be king. But it wasn't.
Is it almost like survival of the unfittest in some way, where like he's trying to rewrite Darwinism, where because you would see the Winklevi represent like survival of the fittest in terms of these sort of supreme physical specimens, smart too, that have through. I don't know how far back their wealth goes. I know that their dad was wealthy, but they sort of represent sort of this natural evolution of what you would think is the best and brightest, right? Like the Kennedy-esque era. And then you have someone like Zuckerberg, who is literally the opposite and creates a world that allows his skill set, his characters, his character is sort of his innate character to become the dominant traits that would allow you to succeed in that world. So it's kind of a weird parallel, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think when he started, he was the downtrodden. He was the one trying to fight his way up. What's really crazy is how it flipped over, and now he becomes the establishment. He becomes the dominant one, and the Winklevoss twins were part of this revolution of Bitcoin. So it is really neat how everything flipped on its head. But yeah, I think that basically it really was, a reverse evolution in a way, or someone, who maybe has to use his brains and cunning and have to find a way to change the system that isn't set up for him.
On some level, I guess, it could have been that, or then you could have named the movie Revenge of the Nerds too. The ultimate revenge of the nerds.
There were some reviews. Yeah, there were some reviews were titled Revenge of the Nerds for sure. And listen, a lot of that is me as well, as much as it is Zuckerberg. I write these stories and I'm inserted in them in some degree. So you can see parallels. I grew up nerdy, geeky, little guys like the Winklevostons terrified me, which is why they look like bad guys. And once I got to know them, they're really not bad guys. They're actually heroic. But I saw them as the guys chasing the Karate Kid around the gym. To me, right. That's what they were. So a lot of what's in The Social Network comes from me and Aaron Sorkin also. But I think it's a fairly true portrayal. But how movies get made. Obviously, there's real stuff and there's other stuff to make it work. But,
well, I think the interesting with Scorsese is that he puts characters on the screen without judging them in terms of that. Like, he doesn't try to telegraph how you should feel about any particular character. And I think I personally hate that when I see it in a movie or read it in a book where let's have Jordan kill a small dog so we know he's bad. Like, they have you do something so reprehensible and so obviously bad that they color it in black and white versus in truth. I'm sure you've found this out. You just said that everything is really much more nuanced when it comes to people. Good people do bad things. Bad people do good things. The person supposedly chasing the Karate Kid around the gym could also be defending the Karate Kid at the same time. It's very strange, right?
Yeah, I mean, nobody really thinks of themselves as a villain. Everyone is doing things because they're doing it out of, usually, I mean, there's a few psychopaths out there, but most people really want to do the right thing, and there are reasons they do the things that they do. And I go into this, every book that way, attempting to really tell it from the point of view of my heroes. I've been called, I think Janet Maslin of the Times called me the billionaire's best friend, because I'm not judging anybody. I'm really attempting to, if you've done some things that are crazy and wild, that's what we live through. We enjoy that. I mean, the world is boring. So I really want to tell the story of exciting people who've done incredible things, even if those things are sometimes in that gray area.
Sure.
So a lot of my books take place in that gray area. But yeah, I think it's really fun to try and get it from the point of view of the character, and not to prejudge and not to be heavy-handed. But at the same time, every great drama has a villain in it. You just have to figure out, how to make that villain accessible to people who would understand why the person is doing what they're doing.
Yeah. One interesting thing I found, like from all your books, is that there's something about the lead character that makes them special, a special skill. There's something that they have, whether it's abundance of charisma, ability with computers, mathematics. Do you always find that at the heart of all these wild success stories, there's typically a special skill in the center of it, or is it ordinary people just that stumble upon things or work really hard? Or is it usually something special they have?
I mean, I think that the main things that I find in all my characters is one, the willingness to take risks, that they don't like authority and they want to make their own pathway. There certainly are skill sets that matter in certain of my books. I mean, you couldn't have created Facebook without Mark Zuckerberg. It's just not possible. The guy had that mindset to be able to do that. But I think the bigger story each time is trying to find a way to beat the system or break through, the rules that are already there. That usually ends up being the thing that connects everybody. But yeah, I mean, listen, you have to be a star in some way or another to be the hero of a story. I think there are stories where it's everyman. My latest book, The Antisocial Network, about the GameStop drama, was a lot of regular people sitting on their couches who bonded together in a way over GameStop, the most ridiculous thing in the world, and drove it all the way, to the heavens. And that was a lot of regular people who were just trying to beat a system. So it's not always that, they've got this brilliant skill set, but in a lot of my stories, I think, yeah, probably.
When you go about writing a book, when you're doing deep research into characters. You're always writing about. Do you write any pure fiction? Or it's always based on a character that's
I
real?
do fiction. I have a thriller coming out February 22, a big book, which is like a Da Vinci Code style thriller called The Midnight Ride. So I do write fiction, but most of my successful books so far have been big nonfiction books, and quite by accident. I never set out to be a nonfiction writer. I wanted to be Michael Crichton. I wanted to be a thriller writer. And I just stumbled upon this group of MIT kids who were going to Vegas every weekend. I started going to Vegas with them every weekend and learned how to count cards and wrote that story. So to research my stories,
you wrote that as it was happening. You wrote it as it was happening. That book.
Yeah, I was writing it. They knew why I was there. I was a writer. But I was going to Vegas. I was carrying money on my body. We were hitting casinos. It was, and that's how I do all my books. Like when I write a story, had I written your story, I would have attempted to insert myself into your life for 6 months.
As many quaaludes as possible.
and just see what's going on and get to know it. So with the Winklevi, I followed them around for 6 months in New York while they built Gemini. I went to Tokyo for a month and lived with expat traders for a book. I live vicariously, but also really through the characters in the research stage.
How long does it take you to write one of these books? Once you're done with your research, what's the timeline it takes you to put it all into actually a manuscript?
It's very fast. So the research phase is a couple months, and then the writing is 2 to 3 months. So I write a book in 8 to 11 weeks each time. It's I don't recommend that to anybody, but that's how I do it. I have all the research done. I have an outline that's pretty intense. Like I know what's going to happen in every single part of the book. And then I lock myself up, and in two months, usually I have a draft. So I try to do 1 to 2 books a year in this way, and have for the past 15 years. So it's kind of nuts.
So when you spend that time writing, when you go into writing mode, is it like literally you put yourself away at a private place, you disconnect from the world, or do you sort of go about your life and still have, social dinners, interact with your family? You just literally just go to a cabin and do the old misery thing,
Yeah. So, there's been different phases in my writing career. So I have little kids now who are 9 and 11. So you can't really just disappear. It's very hard to. So I usually, as I get deeper into the actual writing phase, I draw out, I become more and more withdrawn. Yes. So there does become a period of a few weeks where I'm pretty much locked up somewhere. Sometimes the wife will take the kids away for a week at the last week. But in the beginning phases of writing a book, I'm writing 4 or 5 hours a day, then it's 6 hours a day. And then I get to the point where you're doing 24 hours a day. I've written in hotels, I've written in all sorts of places. When I wrote Bringing Down the House, I stayed in a different Vegas hotel suite every night for about 4 weeks. So I could feel like I was, writing it as it was happening. And then, during the pandemic, I've been locked up in Vermont in a room writing. And so that's more of this reclusive, Stephen King style of writing. So I've done both, but in the depths of a book, yeah, you have to pretty much cut off all. I eat the exact same meal for every meal. Like I don't want to think about anything. So I'm literally eating the exact same meal 3 times a day.
What's that though? What's is it like? What, mac and cheese? Now what?
It's a tuna salad sandwich. I'm a really boring individual, but I get to the point where I routine is incredibly important for writing. You need everything else in your life to be absolutely a routine, so that the writing itself is where you are most of the time. So yeah, I've got a lot of tricks of how to sort of sit still for 4 weeks. But that's probably why I write so quickly too, because you couldn't do this for years. I mean,
Sure.
the authors who spent 2 years writing a book, I would die trying to write the way I write for 2 years.
So when I wrote The Wolf of Wall Street, I literally locked myself away for, I think it was about 9 months. Now, at the time, I didn't know how to write. I had to teach myself. I didn't know how to write just, regular writing. But, writing a book is very, very different than writing something you ever wrote in school or a blog. It's a different level of writing if you want to write a book that's a page turner. And I remember my kids used to say, like, shh, Daddy's, busy and you can't disturb Daddy. My kids were very small back then. And I remember that it was just sort of for me, it was this grueling, probably 14 hours a day where because I couldn't ever write in blocks of less than 4 hours. And it took me time to get back into the swing of it because I had to hear this voice in my head. For me, it was all about this voice in my head that I had. And I was kind of putting that, it took me time to get back into that mindset. So I always had to write these sort of 2 blocks a day, the morning block and the afternoon block. And then when I was really into it, I used to go out and I would sit in bars back then. No one knew me, so it was easy. And I could sit there in the corner and I liked the noise to keep me going because it got so lonely and solitary. I always used to say after The Wolf of Wall Street, I love having written, but I hate writing. It's like, having written, that's the greatest thing in the world.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely something to it. The actual act of writing is somewhat painful. It's like digging a ditch over and over again, and you got to refill the ditch and then dig it. And there's a lot of work to it. But for me, I get into these real crazy routines. I definitely lift music, loud music playing, headphones on, dark room often. There's lots of little tricks, to restart. You're right. The hardest part of writing is getting into it each day. And so one of the tricks you use is that you stop right in the middle of a sentence. I leave the desk at the end of the day in the middle of a sentence, in the middle of a chapter. And then when you sit down to start again, you're just finishing that sentence. Little tricks like that to get you back into it as quickly as you can. I used to have rituals. I used to actually play a game of backgammon against myself while I started writing every morning. And it gets your mind going, and all of a sudden you're writing. All sorts of things like that I used to do. So
how about drugs? Any drugs that you take? I mean, I don't
do any of that. I will say so.
I don't mean illegal. Yeah. Is there any sort of neurotropics like modafinil?
I've heard a lot of authors attempt that, and I've heard stories, pro and con, that sort of thing. I've never really, caffeine is the hardest I get. I think when I was in my 20s, I definitely drank a fair amount as I wrote, but I never found that to be productive necessarily. It was just, being a writer, you tend to be alone a lot, and it's easy to go in that route. But no, not really. I have friends who are writers who have tried all of the weird, military drugs they use to keep awake and all that kind of stuff. Of course
I have. I have.
Yeah, I know you've tried everything. Has anything been helping the productivity in writing? I mean, I've tried
modafinil is my staple drug, which is it's a drug that doesn't make you awake, but it stops you from being sleepy, and that's what they do to a lot of military people take. Because interestingly, what happens with for example, caffeine is they've done tests on people who are heavily caffeinated, and while they think they're performing better, the actual results on the tests show that they're not performing as well.
Yeah.
However, so for example, if someone is sleep deprived, they drink a cup of coffee, they feel better, they think they're performing better, but they're not. They're still performing subpar. While if you take Provigil or Modafinil and you're sleep deprived, you will actually bring you back up to the level that you were at. I've also tried Adderall. It's terrible, absolutely horrific for writing for me.
Yeah.
I did it for a few days and it just reversed on me. I'll have sweaty armpits and shitty writing where I couldn't organize my thoughts. I tried other things that are like vitamins, like things called vinpocetine and huperzine A that they give to Alzheimer's. Like there's a raw form of what they give to Alzheimer's. And really, any increase was incremental at best, and probably it was the placebo effect more than anything else.
But I will say, listen, every writer, I think, who writes books goes through this period where you reach that period of desperation where you're like on page 140 and
I'm there now on page 2.
If there was a pill sitting there that I could take that would get me through the next 2 weeks, you absolutely would take that pill. I've just never really, I'm an addictive personality, I think, just knowing that gambling, all that kind of stuff that I used to love to do. So I know if there was something that worked, it would be troublesome for me because I would use it and abuse it at some point. And so I just stay away from that route. I just think there's no easy way out. Unfortunately, I think with writing, you got to dig that ditch. And the truth is, like you said, having written the book feels so good. It's almost godlike when you look back at something you've created. It becomes a movie or a million people read it. You want to earn that, I think. And so I feel that when I finish a book, all the hell that went through writing it makes it so much better on the other side. And I can look at that reward, and that gets me through the hard part. But this is what I do. I mean, I've been doing this, for so long. I've been fortunate in that all I've ever had to do was write books. And so 1 or 2 a year for 20 years, whatever number of years it's been. I have a process. There's never a problem anymore. I know all the tricks of getting out of writer's block or whatever you want to call it. And there's lots of tricks to it if you really dig into it.
All right, this is it, the putt to win the tournament. If you sink it, the championship is yours. But on your backs when your hat falls over your eyes. Is this how you're running your business? Poor visibility because you're still relying on spreadsheets and outdated finance software. To see the full picture, you need to upgrade to NetSuite by Oracle. Listen, NetSuite is the #1 cloud-based financial system to power your growth. With visibility, control your financials, inventory, HR planning, budgeting, and more, NetSuite is everything you need to grow all in one place. With NetSuite, you can automate your processes and close your books in no time while staying well ahead of your competition. 93% of surveyed businesses increase their visibility and control after upgrading to NetSuite. NetSuite.com/wolf. I'd like to know some of those tricks. I think it'd be very interesting for people to hear a few of the things you do. But one question I want to ask you is do you edit? Do you self-edit, or do you as you write, do you edit, or you just go straight down and you go back and edit afterwards after you're done with the book?
Don't edit. I go through. Okay. The first thing I think is that the key is to write as much as you can and do it by page and not by time. So you don't say, I'm going to write 4 hours today. You say, I'm going to write 3 pages today. And I could be done in 20 minutes and I'm free the rest of the day, or I could be done in 4 hours. But I'm going to write 3 pages a day. If you just say 3 pages a day, you have a book, in 100 days. It's not that big a deal. Right. But I usually do 5 to 6 pages a day. The next, there's lots of these tricks, but basically the hardest thing is getting started. So you want to find a way to never have to be starting. And so if that means stopping the day before in the middle of a sentence, and then you start the next day right in the middle of the sentence. It might also mean when you wake up at 5 a.m, you write 1 sentence, and it doesn't even have to be anything. And that's way before you're going to actually start your writing day. Then 2 hours later, when you sit down to write, you start from there. The key is to get started. Sometimes you use a ritual to get started, and other times, you have something in mind. I don't edit, and don't worry about being perfect. A lot of writers slow themselves down dramatically trying to get it perfect, and that's someone else's job. For your job is to get that book out there, and so my goal is to zoom through the writing phase as fast as I can. Writer's block is usually not staring at a page and saying, I don't know what to write next. Writer's block means you did something wrong before. So go back. So if you run to a point where you're like, I'm stuck, go back to the sentence before that and take away that sentence. Like go back to the sentence before that, take away that sentence. So move backwards until you can restart again. And one of the other keys is the outline. And young writers hate this. I talk to high schools all the time. Everyone hates doing an outline. Outlines are miserable. No one enjoys doing that. But the reality is, the better your outline is, the easier the writing is. My outlines are so strict that I know what page numbers every chapter starts on and ends on. And I don't miss by even a single page.
Really?
So I have a book outlined to the point where when I sit down to write, there is no thinking involved anymore. There is no worrying about pages. There's no worrying about what goes here and what goes there. I have all of the research pinpointed to each chapter in the outline. So I know all of the research and where it goes before I sit down to write. So the writing part of my career is the most fun because I can sit there and just write. I don't have to worry about any of those other things. So those are some of them, but the reality is, I mean, I think you have to be high energy level while you're writing. It can't be, there are going to be some days where you're just going to be you should not even try to write. And then there are other days you've got to be psyched up. You've got to be intense. It's got to be fun, right? Because it's not a fun thing to do normally. And to make it fun, music going, I do all of these crazy things. But yeah, it's a process that I've honed over many years. So the other thing is, don't be trapped by your computer or whatever it is you write on. I use a variety of devices to write. I've dictated a couple books into using dictation software. Really lying on my back, I wrote an entire book that way. And that takes a different type of mental organization, but once you get good at it, it can be very quick. I have another device, I show you. It's called the Neo, right? This is a cheap little piece of plastic, and it's battery powered. It goes for months and years or whatever, and it literally just has 2 lines of text on it. Doesn't hook to anything, doesn't hook to the internet, and you can literally just write on this thing, and then you just hook it into your computer, and it just spits it onto your word processor. So this is like this low-tech, $30 device that I've written 5 books on, because on the laptop there's a lot of distractions, and there's nothing wrong with distraction. But if you've got to write a chapter, you sit down with one of these, it takes you half the time than using a computer. So lots of things like that. Yeah,
I think my big mistake is self-editing. I edit as I go, and I make sure every sentence is perfect before I go on to the next one. And the problem is I try to have this style of writing, which I think works really well when it's finally done and read, and it's sort of like, I wouldn't say poetic, but very rhythmic. And I'm very rhythmic in my sentences and making sure they're balanced and they end in a certain beat when you're reading. Like I want to make sure that when the reader is reading them, they're hearing the voice and the tone very carefully. And the problem is it's very difficult to do that fluidly. It's like going to every sentence and testing which verbs, which tenses. There's so many. I had to learn so much when I didn't realize about like the word had and like even words that you don't, because we drop them when we speak, like that past imperfect, I had. I'm like, what the fuck? I'm like, you don't realize this till you start writing. I'm like, why doesn't any of my sentences make sense? Because there's actually all these other tenses that we use when we speak so fluidly, we don't even think we're using them. You know what I mean? And as I started to learn that stuff, my writing improved drastically. I used models. I used, for example, Tom Wolfe was a huge mentor of mine, and I ripped apart Bonfire of the Vanities. I ripped apart A Man in Full, and I really used that, almost word by word line to see how he introduced characters, how he created conflict, how he described locations. I think my graduate course was someone similar to you in the sense that they immersed themselves in the books Hunter S. Thompson. Where he would really go down and live the story the way you did 21. It was when you were saying that, it reminded me of Hunter S. Thompson. Do you have any mentors like that where you read their work and say, I want to write like that?
So when I was younger, I wanted to be Michael Crichton and Hunter S. Thompson. Those were my 2 idols. And I would keep, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas and Jurassic Park on my desk. And I would leaf through them as I wrote, obsessive, everything about Hunter S. Thompson was just incredible to me.
We were somewhere around Barstow on the edge of the desert when the drugs began to take hold.
Right.
Line one.
Line one, fantastic. And so as I became a nonfiction writer, and I really became a nonfiction writer accidentally, I really just set out to be the gonzo writer, and I would write the story, insert myself in the story, that sort of thing. Over time, I think that, Michael Crichton always remains kind of an idol of mine, and I've moved back and forth to fiction and stuff like that, following on that basis. I also loved Hemingway, the simplicity of it, the idea that you could get everything across and using very low amounts of language. You didn't have to get too crazy. You didn't have to get too flowery. So there were definitely mentor figures in that. In real life, I didn't know any writers, growing up. I didn't really, I came from a family of doctors and lawyers. And I said I want to be a writer, and they were like, "What are you talking about? You can't do that. There's no such thing." And so, but I definitely, Bret Easton Ellis and Jay McInerney were two more that I kind of was in the 80s. They were the 80s writers that I was, I worshipped at that time. And also the lifestyle. I wanted to be one of those cool writers hanging out in a bar, living that crazy life. And so, yeah, I definitely had some idols growing up in terms of the writers I loved. Yeah.
Do you think that writing is a lost art in some respect, or becoming a lost art?
I think that we've shifted to storytelling in a lot of different ways, and I'm actually cool with that. Movies, television, books. I think books are now a smaller component of storytelling than they once were. But I think that there's a great place right now. We're actually in a golden age for content and for stories. I mean, I've never, in my entire career, never had an easier time selling stories. Just the streamers and the movies and television, there's so many, we're consuming so much. I mean, think of how much people watch, and it's not reading necessarily, but audiobooks, podcasts, movies, television. We're consuming way more than we ever did. So storytellers have to adapt to that. I think the idea of sitting with a typewriter, on the beach somewhere, that has shifted dramatically. And that's not what it was even when I started. But there's definitely, if you're willing to tell stories in a lot of different ways, we're in an absolute golden age right now.
Do you think this is a skill that is not taught correctly in school? Like, for example, I graduated from a fine university. I went to American University. When it came time to write my book, I felt ill-prepared in every single way. Like, I just thought I had no skill set whatsoever other than, I was, educated, but it's like we don't learn the art of storytelling. Like, I was a natural storyteller as a speaker, but we don't learn that. Is it possible to teach that in school, or no, it has to be learned by doing it? What do you think?
I think that, yeah. So I think that there has to be more of a focus on reading. I think that, with my kids, we throw books at them all day long. Like, they need to read and read and read. And I luckily grew up in a family where my dad had a rule we had to read 2 books a week before we were allowed to watch TV. So as a little kid, I was a speed reader at the age of 12. And so by the time I wanted to be a writer, I had consumed so much reading but I do agree with you that, there's not as much of a focus on that sort of thing as there is on skills, right? As there is on other things. So yeah, we're not necessarily teaching a generation of writers like we used to.
Let me dig into that, because this is an interesting thing that I remember thinking when I was younger. Maybe it's changed a bit, but I'm guessing not that much. We were asked to read books like The Red Badge of Courage, Moby Dick, A Tale of Two Cities, books that were written in a way that were, where the writing was antiquated. It was almost an anachronism. You weren't reading about things that you were genuinely interested in, and it became work, and boring work at that. Versus, I'm not saying The Wolf of Wall Street's good reading for 4th graders, but I will, I will accept maybe, I don't know, maybe you can take the part blowing cocaine up a hooker's ass is probably not right. Maybe it's more like college reading, one would think. But the interesting thing is, I could tell you so many funny stories that I'm walking around, and kids, the youngest was 7. And I've had many 11 and 12-year-olds come up to me, "Oh my God, my favorite book in the world is The Wolf of Wall Street." I'm like, Has someone called child services on your parents? Now, I'm saying, so The Wolf of Wall Street clearly has some content that is no doubt meant to be read by people over the age of, let's say, 16, okay? I wouldn't say 18, but people who are sexually aware and can understand the context a bit more, right? But I'm sure taking away that, if you asked a kid to read The Wolf of Wall Street or a book of yours that was funny and interesting and relevant, I think kids would read a lot more. It's almost like the school system makes you read shit that you don't want to read. And I think it's a big problem.
I agree with you entirely. And Bringing Down the House actually has been in a lot of high schools. They teach it in a lot of high school statistics class, actually, because math is usually so boring. But when you read about kids beating Vegas, that will turn you on to it. So I agree. If kids should be able to read whatever they want. There should be a ton of different types of books, even anime, all of that kind of stuff, because it all gets your brain going. And the more you read, the smarter you are. And it really will solve all the problems in the world if kids were reading more. I'm a big fan of as soon as kids are able to read it, they should be allowed to read it. Even something like The Wolf of Wall Street or some of my books that are a little bit more, have some of the elements in it that aren't quite as like your life, but close to it. I think it's good if kids see that or are exposed to it in some ways, 15, 16, their minds are growing already. They should see everything that they can get to. So I'm a big fan of that. I would love to see more and more.
They're seeing it anyway online. They're watching the movies. Yeah. They're all watching Pornhub. Okay, I mean, seriously. Right. I think one of the big problems, by the way, seriously, is it's a really big problem. Is online porn. I mean, like for example, and there's nothing wrong with porn, by the way, but like when I was growing up, it was like, you got a hold of a Playboy and you hid it under your bed, and it was like you'd see some gorgeous girl, maybe a little bit of a pussy, just a little bit, and and you're like, and that was like this magic moment. Now it's like a kid who's 12 is like, I want to see horses fucking rabbits with 3 redheads and a midget watching in anime, and like, oh yeah, here's 50 fucking things there. It's like there's no perversion or insanity that's too large, smaller out there that you can't find 100 videos, and they're watching that stuff. Yeah,
the new generation, they are. The new generation coming up is not going to understand how hard it was to see a naked woman when we were kids.
Right. It was a big deal, right? You see a little bit of the vagina on this, and you're like, oh my God, it's this big freaking deal. Right?
Yeah, I don't know what the effects of that are going to be on society as a whole, but
they're going to be profound, though. There's some unintended consequence to this whole thing, right?
Yeah, it is a different world. It is a different world. But they're growing up understanding the things like NFTs that, I'm trying, doing now, because it's all natural to them, right? So things, there's pluses and minuses to growing up.
I want to talk about your NFTs. Yeah. I want to talk a lot about that. One more, I want to just have a couple more questions about the books. Sure. Let's go on to some stuff digital, which I think is really important. Obviously, I'm very much into that right now, so we can have a great discussion about that. One thing that I've always thought about my books and writing in general is that it's never about the story is Wall Street. It's about the people moving through Wall Street. So while the backdrop of my book might be Wall Street and the backdrop of your book might be casinos or the origin of Facebook or cryptocurrency, do you find that at the end of the day, what makes it interesting is just the human beings and their emotions and all the things that we see of backstabbing, kinship, sacrifice, betrayal, love, hate, jealousy, greed. Is that really what makes your stories 100%. Interesting?
Yeah, I mean, I never would have written a book about Bitcoin, for instance. Like, people were pitching me Bitcoin for years, and I was like, this just doesn't seem interesting to me. The word blockchain is like the worst word ever invented. I don't get all this math stuff. But then the Winklevi, right? Then you think, okay, well, these 2 giant blonde dudes who were the bad guys of the social network are billionaires in Bitcoin. That's accessible and it's interesting. And their battle with Mark Zuckerberg, this Shakespearean drama that seems to go on and on. They're going at each other still, right? That is what makes it a great story. So you're right. Wall Street is a great backdrop because there's tons of money and there's all of these other things that we love to see, but it's meaningless without the drama of the individuals in it. And the great books and movies and stories are about these characters and their conflicts and what they go through and their transformation. Those are all the things that we read these things and see these things for. I mean, there's a million Wall Street stories, right? But the ones that elevate to become cultural touch points are because of these dramatic situations, and it's really
right. It was Gordon Gekko was fictional, but he was such a character, Gordon Gekko, that like it was Bud Fox and Gordon Gekko became real. They, from my age group, those were like cultural icons, even though they were fictional. I used Gordon Gekko as my model of success when I went down to Wall Street. Every kid my age wanted to be Gordon Gekko. You know what I'm saying? And you knew he was breaking the law, but you figured out he was doing it in a way where no one was really getting hurt, and you all wanted to be him. And I think it's interesting that The Wolf of Wall Street came many years later after that, but it's always about individuals that are relatable. That was my thing when I was writing it. I wanted. That's why I included so much about my wife and my, and the relationships and all the stuff that makes it interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's that. It all goes back to Shakespeare in a way. I mean, you need to have these dramatic people getting torn apart, the internal strife, all of that kind of stuff. It really resonates. But you're right. You have to understand, and you have to, identify with the character. If you don't identify with the character, it's very hard to watch a story or read, or watch anything. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the key to all of these things.
Of all the stories that you've written, what's the one, is there any one that you found, like the craziest situation that you found yourself in as a result of writing? I mean, intuitively, I would probably think it had to do with Las Vegas, but I'll let you answer.
No, it wasn't. It was, I wrote a book called Once Upon a Time in Russia about Russian oligarchs. And
that sounds like a one for trouble.
I got in with some really intense people, basically scary people who had done a lot of really horrible things. And I was going to and from London every weekend to meet with guys who, had murdered people, but were very nice guys. I mean, they were telling me, lots of incredible stories. And there were moments during that writing that were really scary. And I actually, there were a lot of moments where I was like, oh, geez, I don't know what I'm getting into. So I would say in terms of my own intense, fear of what was going to happen to me, that book was the one where I got into situations that were most frightening. I mean, that
give me
book
an example.
Can
you give me an example that you're comfortable giving?
Sure.
What's it?
So yeah, I there's this, I wrote, so the way that book came about is I got a phone call from a director, a Hollywood director, Brett Ratner, I don't know if you know Brett. And Brett was a Miami guy.
I knew you were going to say Brett.
Yeah. Always calling me and pitching me stories that were incredibly dangerous. Like, can you go hang with these gun runners in Miami? And I was like, I'm not going to hang with those gun
the drug dealers. I know he had that story too.
So anyways, he calls me up out of the blue and he's like, I got a story. I'm not going to tell you what it is because you won't do it. And I was like, well, that doesn't sound like a good pitch. He's like, I promise you it's the biggest story. Come to London. So I flew to London. I meet Brett and we go to this bar, and sitting at the bar is one of the most famous Russian oligarchs, surrounded by Mossad security. Like there's bulletproof limousines.
I know who it was.
Yeah, you do. And I'm like, Brett, I'm not going to do this story. I'm like, this is not me. I'm scared of everything. I live in Boston. He's like, just talk to them. And they start to tell me this story. And it's an incredible story about Roman Abramovich, about Boris Berezovsky,
Yeltsin,
about where they found Putin. It's an incredible story. I'm sure you know all the people I was talking to. But anyways.
I do.
I get deep into the story. And I'll just tell a couple of little scenes. One scene, there's a scene in the story where Roman Abramovich and Boris Berezovsky and another character, they want to buy an oil refinery from this old Soviet dude. And they basically go to him and say, sell it to us. And he says, no, he laughs them out of the room. That night, that guy goes swimming in the Irkutsk rivers and drowns. His bodyguard, who's the only witness, gets into a bar fight and dies. So they tell me this, and I write the scene up, and I'm looking at it, and then I call them up, and I'm like, listen, this scene makes it sound like you killed this guy. And he's like, yes. And I'm like, well, do you want me to change this scene in any way? And he's like, no, it's fine. And I'm like, well, how is it fine that I'm going to write the scene that makes it sound like you murdered this person? And he's like, you have to understand that Russia in the 1990s wasn't like America in the 1990s. It was like America in the 1890s.
Is Wild West.
And in the 1890s, if someone disrespected you, you killed him. And so there were scenes like that over and over again. I was walking in New York with this guy, and there were these loud college kids behind us. And I could see he was getting more and more annoyed. And he's like a bulldog of a man. Like, he's not young, but he's bulldog. And he turns to me and he goes, does is very annoying. And I said, well, they're just having a good time. It's New York, whatever. And he's like, shall I do something? And I was like, there was this moment where I knew that this was not a joke. Like, this guy's eyes changed. And there was no question in my mind that if I had said yes, there would have been blood on the streets of New York. And I was like, no, we're going to go to dinner. Everything's fine. And he just was like, okay, calm down. And we walked away. But it was like the tension changed so much in the air that these people, like, who I'm talking about, are some of these guys. Like, they're different. They are willing to go that extra step if they feel they need to. So there were lots of moments like that writing that book that were intense.
I think it's interesting that one thing we often forget about in the United States is that the whole world is not like the United States. We have a very different view. For example, I spent a lot of time in Russia, and like, they love a strong leader. Like, many people love Putin there. They don't want the same type of things that we want. Like, we have certain things that are so instilled in our DNA and the culture of our DNA, with, certain rights for voting, freedom of speech. Like, if you go to a lot of countries, like, they're like, freedom of speech is overrated. Like, they're like, what do I care if I can't say what I want? I can think whatever I want. Like, I could tell my best friend whatever I want. But, it's sort of like, obviously the extreme examples like of North Korea are wildly toxic. But I just think sometimes we forget that coming from the United States, we think everyone else is like us, and they're just not. They're very, different parts of the world have very different things that are their values.
Yeah, we're very soft. We don't go through the stuff that a lot of these people have gone through. And to them, life is not as precious or easy, right? So, writing that story was eye-opening. The Asia story, I wrote a story called Ugly Americans about expat traders living in Tokyo. And they partied like you. they were like as over the top as people could be. They were all 20-something American kids who were in Asia for the first time. And there were just no rules, right? There was no such thing as illegal information, right? You could do anything. And these people, I wrote a story about a guy who made $500 million in 5 minutes when they shifted the Japanese stock exchange. And everything he was doing would have been illegal here, but wasn't illegal there. It all takes place in the sex underground in Tokyo. And so I got to hang out with Yakuza. And these are guys who didn't have their pinky because they would cut it off and give it to their boss when they did something wrong. So I was in a world like that was just completely foreign and wild. And so that was another story where, we pushed the boundaries. Yeah.
If you want to grow your business, you want to diversify your content, this is a product that I 1000% believe in and use myself every day. And it's been a game changer for me, making more money for me than any other app I've used that's even close to this. It's called Melon. And Melon is a web-based live streaming studio that makes streaming easy and lucrative. It is literally the best out there by a country mile. And I'm looking you in the eye. I'm telling you, that's a fact. Go to live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube in just 5 clicks. All of them at once. You're not going to find a better tool out there than Melon for your live streaming needs. Impossible. Better streaming in HD, recording functionality, real-time audience interaction. You get everything with Melon. So start streaming with Melon today. Go to melonapp.com/wolf. That's Melon, MELON-APP, melonapp.com/wolf. Sign up for a free account. Because of me, it's free, by the way. You get a high-performance professional live streaming tool for free. It's blazing fast. The response time is like that, low CPU usage. It's all available right in your browser. Go to melonapp.com/wolf and start streaming today. This is a no-brainer. If you don't try this, honestly, then you must not like making money online. Just could you go a bit deeper, explain the sex underground in Tokyo?
Yeah. Well, so in Tokyo, there's basically a district, where just about any sort of thing is kink is catered to. The idea is that whatever goes on below the belt is natural. It's a natural process. So they really have very specifically catered things. And for instance, there would be something like sexual harassment clubs, they're called. And you would go there and it would actually look like a train car, like it looked like a subway car. And there are women who are riding the subway, and you pay a fee and then you can go in and molest them. Like there are places called, no pan, they're coffee shops where the floor is glass and the waitresses are all wearing skirts and no underwear, and you go in and the bar is actually underneath there. There's this whole world that
you gotta love the
to
Japanese. I just gotta tell you just gotta love them.
Different world. And
the level of ingenuity.
It took place around the 2000. And all these American kids would go over there to work for these big banks, and they would be given these huge expense accounts. So they'd be giving a $10,000 a month apartment, which at the time was a lot. They were given unlimited, basically, credit cards. And all of business would take place in these kind of underground hostess bars and places like that. So the book goes deep into that story, and it's about an American kid who was like a football player from Jersey. He'd never been out of Jersey. He had like a mullet. He was just who basically fell in with an expat crowd in Tokyo, fell in love with the daughter of a Yakuza gangster, and nearly got killed. But it's a great story. We've been working on trying to make a movie of it with many different studios and haven't quite pulled it off yet. But it was a different time too. I don't think that it really goes on the way it did around the 2000 now. Things have changed pretty dramatically everywhere.
This little thing called the cell phone camera has made it very difficult
to
do anything these days. Yeah, it's just like really sad,
Right. It's a different world right now.
I want to shift to your some of your digital projects like NFTs. Tell me first of all what you're doing. Number one.
Yeah. So
I probably want to buy some, so I want to hear about it.
Yeah, let me tell you all about it. So what I'm attempting to do, and it's very simple what I'm doing. I'm obsessed with the NFT space. Over the past 6 months, I've been looking into it. The Winklevoss twins introduced me to it. I really think it's going to be a revolution over this next year. I think the idea that you can own something unique but digital is really important, and it's even bigger than what people think it is. It's not just art. So what I'm doing, which is we're calling the Ben Mezrich Project, which launched with our first drop last week and sold out, which was great. I'm doing 3 drops, each one revolving around the types of stories that I write. So the first drop was about meme stocks and the whole GameStop thing, which is images from that. The second drop is going to be
how many images were in the drop?
6,000 pieces were in the first drop, and they were minted at 0.06. I think the floor is at like 0.12 now or something like double.
0.06 ETH, right?
Right. And that's what they were, the first drop. The second drop is going to be free, 1 per wallet for everyone who owned the first drop. And that's going to be revolved around Bitcoin and billionaires. And the third drop is going to be another 6,000 at 0.06. If you own all 3 drops, you get a piece of the movie I'm writing about NFTs. So I'm writing a screenplay about the NFT space, and it's going to be pro rata, 50%. I'm going to share it with the NFT community. So whatever the movie, if we sell the screenplay to a studio, if we make the movie ourselves, which is another possibility, if we create funding for it through an NFT project, you'll own a percentage based on, and there are script scores. So interestingly enough, there are rarity features in each NFT, and certain rarity features can triple the amount of shares of the script that you own. So it's fairly simple.
You priced them very affordably, 0.06.
Yeah, my goal is
about what is that? It's about $18.
This is an on-ramp. This is an on-ramp. So the reason we priced it low is I have tons of fans who don't even know what NFTs are, right? I have tons of readers who haven't really moved into the digital space yet. I wanted to create a project where my audience and my fans, but also people that are intrigued by the stuff that I write, can become a big community and own a piece of a movie that I'm going to write. And my goal is this turns into a platform where I do books, where I do movies, where other authors can come onto the platform, and we can really drive how an NFT can be used to create art, but also to build a community. Because you're beyond being an author. You're also a celebrity, and you're also someone who people know who you are. But most authors can't get a community. It's very hard to reach people and to have them incentivized, but also to be able to really communicate with them. Twitter is like a megaphone, right? Something like Kickstarter, they're just giving you money to do something. What NFTs allows is, we now have 10,000 people on the Discord. I've got 10,000 people who I can go on and I'm talking to them all day long, who are not only owning a little piece of something that I'm doing, but are actually giving me ideas and helping me write this movie. And so I'm going to write the screenplay over the next 6 months, and then we're going to try to make the movie out of it. So it's giving utility, and then there's other things. So one-on-one writing with me. There's going to be a Vegas poker event. There's going to be an online poker game for NFT holders. We're just trying to create as much utility as we can for that. We're going to invite people to my book parties who have NFTs. And then we'll see where it goes. But it's been really fun. I go on there all day long at the Discord and talk to people about the NFTs. The artwork was amazing. And so the first drop sold out very quickly. And now we're going to do the second drop as a free drop to the people who own the first one. And so there's a great, secondary market. It's moving along. And then after these drops, I think what I've also been doing is I'm writing stories. So there's something called Ben's Story Time on the Discord, where I'm just putting little memoirs from my life and my writing. Eventually that will turn into a book, which I think the NFT owners will then be a part of as well. So I'm trying to push NFTs in an interesting way for writers. I think that for authors, the NFT space is going to be extremely important. Building a community, incentivizing a community, and also getting past the silos that keep a lot of authors out. It's a really interesting way to build a following and to publish. So
have you ever self-published, or you always go through a publisher?
No. So I sold my first book when I was 26, and I was able to break through and sell it to a big publisher from the very beginning. So I've built a career in the establishment essentially, and each book has been big enough.
Me too.
Movies have been big enough so that I haven't had a need or an interest. I like the idea of self-publishing. I think there's something very cool about you owning your work and profiting from it if it does really well. But for me, I want to see it in bookstores. I want to see it in every Barnes and Noble.
Sure. I mean, I think for me, yeah, I get it. For me, it's been like I'm in the middle. I'm running late here, but I'm writing a new book here, which is really a book designed to help mostly young people, but financial education. How do you invest in the stock market, the crypto, sort of a how-to? Because I know they won't really read books from other people, but they'll read it if it's my name on it. They'll all read the book, right? So I think it was a very important book for people to read, because it'll help them. It'll stop them from getting slaughtered, if nothing else, and hopefully get them on the road to proper investing, right? Right. But for me, I hate writing so much that I took a huge advance, because now I have no choice but to write. In other words, without the advance, I would have never written it. I signed it saying, now I'm screwed.
I understand entirely that feeling. You need that little incentive.
Took the money, so now I'm screwed, right?
Right. And listen, we've all been there. Anyone who writes books early knows that moment where you're like, oh God! I mean, it's misery.
What did I do? Right?
What did I
I'll
do
give you the money back. Here's your $500,000. Take it back.
Right. I could be on a beach somewhere. I don't need to do this. But the reality is that once you get there, you're going to be so pleased and happy, and it's going to feel so good. And you're educating tons of people.
And that's for me is important. It's an important book. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Part of what writing is it's something you need to do more than it's something you want to do. And I feel like, with me anyways, if I don't write for a period of time, I start to get really antsy. I start to fall apart. I really was built to do this. But in terms of like self-publishing, the problem with self-publishing is there's no vetting process. There are millions of people out there. Anyone can throw something up onto Amazon. How do you know what you're reading is going to be good? I don't like that people spend money for something and get it, and then 2 pages in are like, what was this? This was just someone. Yeah. So I think that what the publishers offer is this vetting. You're not going to have a book come out from a major publisher from someone who is not talented, or at least hasn't worked really hard to get there. But on the other hand, if you can build a community some way, and that's why I think the NFT model is really interesting, you are offering something to people who actually want to read it already. And so I think you've gotten past that throwing something onto the pile situation, where you've built an audience already who are intrigued and are interested and are invested, and fighting for them. But yeah, I haven't attempted. I did. That's not true. I wrote one ebook, strangely enough, and I never promoted this book, and now I probably won't, because I wrote a book and I literally published it in 2015. I wrote it in like 2005 about a coronavirus coming out of the middle of China, hitting the United States. It was infectious before you showed symptoms. They created quarantine laws all over the place, shut down cities. They started testing wastewater. Everything that is in that book actually happened. It's called Q. You can find, and I called it Q, which even before that existed. And I wrote this book. I put it on as an ebook. I swear, you can find it. It's out there. And now when I read it, it terrifies me. because of how much I got right. It's a much darker story, though. The reason I haven't promoted it is a very dark story because the virus doesn't get better; it gets worse. And
well, it's like Songbird. The movie Songbird is out there. That's like a really dark dystopian movie where there's coronavirus. I think 23. It mutates. It's sort of like Omicron, and then the worst part of like Omicron, the Spanish flu of 2018 of 1918.
So that's the one thing that's the only thing I've self-published ever. It was an ebook I put out in 2015. And I haven't talked about it because it's a little too eerie for me. But in general,
two questions.
I
have two important questions. I'm sorry, keep talking. I'll keep going.
No, go ahead. I want to hear your questions. Yeah.
What's not what's your favorite book, but what's the one? If everybody, I have a very large following, right? A lot of people are going to listen to this podcast. Hopefully, hundreds of thousands of people. What's the first book of yours you recommend they read? Everyone should everyone should read one of Ben's books, but what's the first book?
Okay, if you've never read any of my books, anything that I've written, I would say Bringing Down the House. It became the movie 21. If you've seen the movie 21, then you kind of already know that story. I have such a wide range. My book coming out in February is a thriller, so if you like Da Vinci Code style thrillers, The Midnight Ride. If you're into crypto, Bitcoin Billionaires is the one, and The Antisocial Network if you were part of the GameStop thing. I have a wide bench because I write about a different thing every year.
Sure.
So it's hard for me to say. If you've never read any of my books, I would read Bringing Down the House. But come to the Discord, come to the NFT project, Ben Mezrich project, and we talk about all my books.
It's Ben Mezrich project it's called?
It's called the Ben Mezrich project. And we're calling them BenFTs, BENFTs, and friends with benefits, friends with BenFTs. But yeah, listen, I'm on there all the time telling stories. So it'll lead you. If you like UFOs, I wrote a UFO book. If you like woolly mammoths, I've written so many different types of stories that it's hard for me to say one thing.
And how about online? Where's the best place to reach you? A website, Instagram?
Yeah, just go to Ben Mezrich on Twitter or benmezrich.com or Ben Mezrich NFT. Those are all me. And I'm all over the place, and I'm pretty easy to find. So you'll see, my books all over the place. Yeah.
Last question. I know we both got to go. One more question. Do you think everybody should write one book or no? Is it everyone have one book in them they should write, or is not?
I think that I would love to see everyone write. I think it's so good for you to write. I don't know what your experience was, but as hellish as writing is, sitting down and getting your thoughts.
Therapy for me. It was therapy for me.
Yeah, I think it is for everybody. It really, no one can tell your story like you can tell your story, and everyone's kind of the hero of their own story. And it's interesting to write something down. I think it takes a certain kind of mental delusion to think that you can actually finish a book because it's hellish for the most part. But I do think that it's a wonderful art, and I think that everyone should give it a shot and see if you want to do it. But listen, like I said, there's a million ways to tell a story right now. We're in the golden age of storytelling. You could do it through a podcast. You could do it on YouTube. You could do it anywhere. Telling stories is so important and so great. Yeah. And listen, I want to say to you before we go anywhere, I am a huge fan of yours. And I'm not just saying that. I literally have said in every interview, and you can find them all over the place, what's the one story that you would have written that you wished you had written? And it's yours. It's always your story. I read your book multiple times. It's just so honest and intense, and beyond. Like, I love characters that, authority is unimportant. They're breaking the rules, but you can kind of see why. I don't know. There's something about it that's truly American in it, and I think it's awesome and a great movie. Obviously.
Thank you. I guess for me, I think what made the book special was that I didn't hire a ghostwriter. Like I got it. There was no separation from the person who.
And too bad for me. Too bad for me.
I know, right? Because I would have loved to have one, but I think that's what made that particular book special. And also, by the way, that book was written in a very, very dark, painful time in my life. So it's funny because I'm writing this new book now, which is just a straight business book, right? So very different. Although my goal is to make it a funny page turner so people want to keep reading about the business stuff. I think I did pretty well with that. My last book was called Way of the Wolf, which was a business book on sales, but I made it kind of a leap more. I guess more engaging than the typical book on sales would be, but at least I try to. But when I recently I went back and reread The Wolf of Wall Street, at least the first 150 pages of it, to try to get my head back into writing, and I was like, oh, I can't believe I wrote that. Oh my God. What was I? Because at that moment, I literally had nothing to lose.
Yeah.
I was at the bottom point in my life, so I just bared it all.
That's
and I
when
think
the best
that's what
comes
made
out.
it so good. That's what made it so
it is.
good.
It's much. I tell young writers this all the time when they're they're getting rejection and they're in this darker period. I'm like, that's the best writing time of your life.
Oh, absolutely.
Way better, when it becomes a business, when you're had some level of success, it's much harder to get sincerity out. And when you're in the darkest history and you don't think anyone's going to read it, that's when the best stuff comes out. So yeah, absolutely.
I got to tell you, I want to thank you for this because number one, I've been suffering from writer's block. I just really literally have not been able to really muster the mental energy to get off the mark because I have so much great stuff happening in my life, and I typically think I write more out of pain and when I have to than when I want to. But you actually gave me some renewed vigor here to get myself started. So I thank you for that. And also, thanks for really just coming on here. And your stories are amazing. Everybody here, everyone who's listening, I really just at least just read one of his books or the first 10 pages. Just once you read the first 10 pages of his books, you're going to keep reading. And they're important books because they all, I think the one thing they have in common is they bring a certain period in history to life. And it gives you a better understanding of why the world is the way it is today when you go back and read your books. Each book almost gives you some insight into what was going on at that moment in time in an era. And it connects right back up to your last book, which is the Bitcoin Billionaires, the one that's I think very timely right now.
Network. One after that was the Anti-Social Network about GameStop drama.
All right, but it all connects up. You know what I'm saying? So I think it's really
connects. You got Vegas to crypto to GameStop.
My hat's off to you, Ben. Thanks for coming on. Let's keep in touch and take care, everybody.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right, everyone. Thanks for coming on. And remember, buy one of Ben's books. Buy at least 21. Bring It Down the House, and also check him out on Twitter, on online, and just benmezrich.com or in his Discord room. Everyone, take care. Have a great day.